Hey everybody. Okay, so I'm going to go over the elements of fiction for you. Remember that fiction is fake, it's not real. Um, so the first element of fiction, I'm going to share my screen so that we can all look at this once I figure out where the hell I am. Okay, so the elements of fiction, there are, I think there's 5, if I remember correctly. Maybe there's 6. There's 6. Okay, sorry. You would think I would remember everything by how much I teach it. So your first one is going to be characters, okay? So you can't essentially have much without having a character, or at least 2 characters. When you have these characters, you have to have a backstory. You need to have some type of grasp of psychology, and you have to understand their character arc, which means, are they going to remain the same? So think about yourself. Okay, are you the same person as you were when you were 10? Probably not. Okay, so that means that your arc, it kind of goes up. Okay, so when we think of these characters, for example, maybe Arnold Friend from Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? We're introduced to him as a creep and he continues to stay a creep. So he's a very flat character. He does not change. A flat character is one that stays consistent, they don't change. And then a round character is one that does change. They make essentially a 180 from how they began their story or their character arc. Okay, obviously I'm not going to read these things to you. They are available to you in your files. But character is the foundation for the entire work. Okay, you then have plot. Okay, so you can't have a plot without having characters because you need people to fulfill your plot. Okay, so what is the plot? Plot and character can kind of change places. These are the order that they are of their importance. I'm sorry. So the plot is basically your blueprint. It's your story arc. Okay, so think of rising action, falling action, climax. Okay, so think of those areas. Here they are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so you have your exposition, your introduction, your rising action, your climax, your falling action, and your resolution. Okay, so try to follow those when you go into applying these elements to your reader's response. Okay, for example, with maybe A Rose for Emily, because it's kind of backwards. We start at the end, we start with the funeral, and then we do a series of flashbacks about how she lived her life. Okay, so we somewhat end with the resolution. William Faulkner changed this whole idea of a plot. We ended with a resolution, but the resolution was also the introduction. Okay, so it was kind of both. And then we begin with our rising action. We have our climax of Homer's death, and then the falling action. Okay, and then of course we have the resolution, the true resolution of finding the hair in bed with Homer's decomposed body. Okay, so how can we analyze in our reader's response the plot of either Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? The Yellow Wallpaper, A Good Man Is Hard to Find, or A Rose for Emily. All right, your third one is setting. Remember that even though it's inanimate, it's not a real thing. Your setting is a big deal in relation to your elements of fiction. So if you think about it with Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? We're not really given a true setting. We're not given a town, I should say. We're given the movie theater, the diner, drive-in, and then Connie's house / driveway. In A Good Man Is Hard to Find, it's Georgia, Tennessee, Florida. Okay, so we know that it's the Southeast. And then with A Rose for Emily is Jefferson, Mississippi. It is a fictional place. However, it tells us that it is in the South. It's also in the 1800s. Okay, so this is the end of slavery, beginning of industrialization. Okay, so we have all those hints from knowing that Homer came from the north to pave the roads. The mailboxes are being put up, which means that a post office has essentially been established. So that gives us hints to the time period. Connie from Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? judging by the prices of the movies that they talk about, the prices of the food, her hairstyle, the clothing that we're told that Arnold Friend is wearing, we can guesstimate that this is the 80s. Sorry, I'm trying to do something else at the same time, and it's driving me nuts. Okay, so these are all parts of the elements of fiction. Why is it important that Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been takes place in the 80s and not in the 90s or the 70s? A Rose for Emily. Why is it so important that it took place in the 1800s at the cusp of change versus maybe in the 1700s or the 20th century? What's the other one? A Good Man Is Hard to Find. I can't entirely remember the time period that was in. Upload. Oops. But again, we're given, that's a little more modern of a reading. So that's just something to keep in mind. How would that differ if it was in a different time period? Okay, these are things to think about when you are going to do your reader's response. How does the setting play into how you feel about it? For example, A Rose for Emily, because of the change of times. Okay, so we're trying to, slavery has essentially been abolished, but there's still people that have servants, which many of us will still consider a form of slavery. So how does that factor into it? How would this be different if this story remained the same but changed the time period? Is it a cultural norm? Okay, so this is something in that, where is this, right? Cultural norms of communication. Okay, so that specifically applies to A Rose for Emily. People today, because we are in the 21st century, get very hung up on the language usage, but that language is very appropriate for the time period it was written for. So it's just something to think about. Okay, you have to think of how the setting works for the characters. Okay, so if you have a character that wants to be very technologically advanced, you're not going to set them in the 1800s. The next is point of view. Okay, so what point of view is it written in? First, second, third? Remember, first is I and me. Second is you, we, us. And third is they, them, their. Now you also have third person omniscient, which is basically, you can pretend you're God. You see everything. Okay, so that means that your narrator is telling us everything that's going on. We're not in one perspective. For example, if you read any of the Twilight books, it's all from Bella's perspective. None of it is from anyone else's. Okay, then we have the Game of Thrones series. Maybe if anybody has read those, the chapters are the names of the character whose perspective it's from, so that the point of view changes. Then we have A Rose for Emily, which is third person omniscient. However, it is the perspective of the townspeople as a whole. You could also say that Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been is also third person, sorry. And then A Good Man Is Hard to Find is a little tricky because it's mostly from the grandmother's point of view. But it's like we're sitting next to the grandma and we're along for the ride. So those are some things that we have to think of. Okay, how would the story differ if it was from a different point of view? For example, if we changed A Rose for Emily to be written from Homer's point of view, or from Emily's father's point of view, or from Emily's point of view, the story would be completely different. That's why you see, like, a lot of authors will write a secondary line almost in another perspective. For example, the Twilight books, we have Midnight Sun written from Edward's perspective. The 50 Shades of Grey books, they're written from Anna's perspective, or Anna, yeah, right, yeah. They're written from her perspective, but then there is the other side of the series called Grey, written from Christian's perspective. So these are important things that help you get a bigger picture. But a point of view, if it's from one particular character, it means that it's very limited. So you have a very limited glance. You're kind of looking through like a straw as to what the whole picture is versus looking through maybe a telescope or a glass. Okay, so that goes to how much you want your reader to see. Okay, if you want them to see everything that's happening, you would write in third person. The fifth element is the theme. Okay, you would think that theme would be pretty important. However, it's not. Your theme is developed from having a plot and from having your characters and your setting act out that plot. Okay, so your theme is what the story is about. It's basically your main message that you want to get across. Okay, so Faulkner, for example, wanted to get across that change and tradition are two things that are going to continually clash, but have to merge together. Okay, I don't know how else to really phrase that. This is taking forever. This upload is killing me. What else? What else? Oh, okay. So with theme, it's never bluntly stated. Okay, it is never just clear and say like the theme of this story is blah. It is something that you have to read between the lines. It does take time to develop the sense of being able to pick this up. However, thankfully, you know, we're so advanced in technology that we could just Google, you know, the theme of things. I couldn't do that back in my day. Anyway, I'm not salty about it, I promise. Okay. So think about how effective stories are, or how, yeah. I can't think of how I want to do that. If a theme is known, if you go into a story knowing its theme, then you can properly analyze if it was effectively written. So if you were to say, go back in time, and now that you know that the theme about A Rose for Emily is basically change versus tradition, how does that affect the reading and how you read it? How does that affect how you read the characters and their situations? And then finally, the last element is style. The style is basically your voice. This is something that takes time to develop as well as a writer. The voice, it is the language that you're using, the way you're constructing sentences. So for example, think of a children's book, okay? The syntax, the way that the sentences are structured, are very simple, very simplistic. They're doing that on purpose because it needs to have a very blunt subject and very blunt predicate. They do not have complex sentences. They don't have, oh my God, I can't think of the other term that I wanted to say. Sometimes to hear the style or to understand the style that it is written in, this can kind of go hand in hand with point of view. You might have to read the reading out loud to get the best sense of the author's style. So for example, in this particular piece for A Rose for Emily, he chose to really acquire the language of the time period. For Joyce Carol Oates, she chose to address everything about the characters to the time period, but not necessarily their language. Their language is something that we would probably say today. Okay, so those are just styles hard to pick up on, only because it's effectively used more as a writer and less as a reader. What else did I want to say? I think that's about it. But when you go to apply these elements to your reader's response, think about how all of these things are broken apart. Try to break it apart from your reading, whichever one you chose to write about. Okay, so what is the theme? You can address the theme. What is the plot? What did you think of the plot? What did you think of the characters? Should there have been another character added to the list? Should there have been a character that's omitted? Is it a necessary character? Is it not? Okay, things like that. How would the story differ in a different place for setting? Or how does the setting play a role? Okay, so those are what you're going to apply to your reader's response in terms of the elements of fiction. I hope this helps. I'll see you guys later. Bye, guys.